Something happened on the set of The Chosen that no one was prepared for. It was supposed to be another carefully planned filming day. Cameras placed, lighting perfected, lines rehearsed. But when the team began shooting The Last Supper for Season 5, the atmosphere in the room shifted in a way that even seasoned professionals struggled to put into words. Jonathan Roumie, who has portrayed Jesus for years, reached a point where he simply could not continue. His voice failed, his body weakened, and the set fell into a silence that felt heavier than anything produced by acting alone. Crew members stopped what they were doing. Some stared, some lowered their heads, others simply waited, unsure of what they were witnessing. People who weren't religious said they felt something they had no language for. Those who were familiar with faith said the moment touched them in a way they had never experienced on a production set. This video investigates that day, what led to it, how it unfolded, and why so many people still talk about it as if it were more than a scene. You will hear what happened before, during, and after the cameras rolled, and why those present believe something extraordinary took place. On paper, the Last Supper sequence in Season 5 was not expected to be different from any other major scene. The production schedule was tight, the team was experienced, and everyone understood the symbolic weight of what they were about to film. Even so, the atmosphere early that morning already felt different to several members of the crew. People spoke more quietly, the cast kept to themselves, and there was a sense of preparation that went beyond technical duties. No one mentioned it out loud, but many later admitted they felt a type of seriousness that didn't usually appear until the camera was rolling. The set itself was designed with precision, the table arranged exactly as the script required, the lighting adjusted to match ancient room conditions, and every movement marked to avoid errors. For the team, this was routine. For the actors, it was the beginning of a weight they knew they had to carry without breaking character. Jonathan Roumie arrived focused, calm, and noticeably introspective. Crew members observed him taking long pauses before stepping into the room, as if preparing not just for a performance but for something heavier. When filming began, nothing looked unusual. The actors moved through the first lines as rehearsed, and the production team monitored monitors and audio feeds normally. But shortly after the first few takes, something shifted. There was a change in Jonathan's expression, subtle enough that it didn't seem like acting but clear enough for those who knew him to notice. A short silence followed one of his lines, and instead of cutting, the director allowed the moment to continue. The room felt different, and everyone sensed it. Technicians who rarely paid attention to emotional details on set found themselves stopping mid-task. A boom operator later reported that he almost forgot to hold his microphone correctly because he felt something unexplainable in the room. One camera assistant mentioned that the air felt heavier, not in a frightening way, but in a way that made him uncertain whether to keep moving or stay still. These reactions weren't coordinated and had nothing to do with the script. They were spontaneous responses from people accustomed to routine and repetition. By the third take, the quiet intensity had grown. The usual small noises of a working set, chairs shifting, crew whispering, paper rustling, disappeared almost completely. No one was told to be silent. They simply became silent on their own. That was the moment several crew members later identified as the point when the filming environment began to feel more like a gathering than a production. Jonathan continued acting, but his delivery changed. His voice trembled slightly, his breathing slowed, and for the first time that day, the director looked unsure whether he was watching a performance or witnessing something deeply personal happening in real time. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't exaggerated. It was quiet, raw, and unmistakably human. Something was beginning to unfold, something no one had predicted when they arrived that morning. The breaking point came without warning. Jonathan Roumie delivered a line he had rehearsed many times before, but midway through, his voice weakened and the words faded. He lowered his head, closed his eyes, and took a long breath that did not steady him the way it usually did. The room stayed silent, waiting for him to recover, but instead of continuing, he stepped back from the table and placed his hand on his chest as if trying to find strength that simply wasn't there. No one rushed toward him. No one shouted for a pause. It was as if the entire set understood at the same moment that something deeply personal was happening. The other actors at the table exchanged worried glances. A few looked down, unsure whether to stay in character or break from the scene completely. The silence became intense not because they were acting, but because they didn't know what else to do. Jonathan tried to speak again, but emotion overwhelmed him. His breathing became uneven, and he shook his head, signaling that he couldn't continue. This wasn't the exhaustion of a long filming day. It wasn't theatrical distress. It was a collapse that came from a place he wasn't able to control. Those closest to him said the expression on his face looked like a man carrying something too heavy to put into words. Dallas Jenkins, the director, stepped forward but didn't speak. He didn't call cut. He stood still, watching Jonathan with a mix of concern and respect. Later, he explained that interrupting the moment felt wrong. He sensed that it wasn't an acting problem that needed fixing, but something that had to be allowed to unfold without interference. For a director used to managing every detail of production, his stillness was unusual. The production crew reacted in ways none of them expected. A lighting technician quietly put his equipment down and stood with his hands together, not in prayer, but in a posture of waiting. A camera operator had tears forming even though he didn't fully understand why. The boom operator, known among the team as someone who rarely showed emotion, stood frozen in place, eyes fixed on Jonathan. Some crew members later admitted that they had no religious background. They didn't interpret the moment through faith. What unsettled them was the authenticity they witnessed. A moment so vulnerable, uncontrolled, and powerful that they struggled to explain it using any professional vocabulary. One of them said, "It wasn't an actor breaking character. It was a person reaching a limit I didn't expect to see on a set." As minutes passed, no one spoke. The cast remained seated, some with eyes closed, others looking at Jonathan with quiet empathy. No one tried to comfort him with gestures or words. They sensed it wasn't the right time. The room felt suspended, as if everyone was waiting for him to decide when the moment had passed. When Jonathan finally lifted his head, his eyes were filled with tears, but also with a seriousness that made several people look away out of respect. He apologized softly, though no apology was needed. Then he said something that left the room motionless. "It felt too real. I couldn't separate myself from it anymore." That single sentence changed the tone of the entire shoot. The team realized they were not simply filming one of the most symbolic moments of the Christian narrative. They were witnessing an actor confronting the weight of portraying a figure who carries deep meaning for millions of people around the world. After a short break, Jonathan returned to the table, still visibly affected. No instructions were given, but the cast and crew resumed their positions with a level of seriousness that hadn't existed earlier. Several later described it as a moment when the project stopped being work and became something closer to a shared experience. From that point forward, the filming of The Last Supper would not resemble a typical production day again, long before cameras rolled on The Last Supper. Jonathan Roumie had already entered a difficult stage of personal preparation. Portraying Jesus was never a simple acting task for him. It became a responsibility that followed him through every season of the series. By the time season 5 began filming, he had developed a routine centered on silence, prayer, and self-discipline. This wasn't a performance strategy. It was how he kept himself grounded while carrying a role that demanded emotional honesty. In interviews, Jonathan openly acknowledged that he often questioned his ability to portray Jesus in such a meaningful moment. The Last Supper, according to Christian tradition, is not just a farewell meal. It is the moment Jesus reveals the purpose of his sacrifice and establishes a covenant millions consider sacred. Jonathan knew this scene would be watched by believers who hold it close to their hearts. That awareness created a pressure heavier than anything written in the script. He began preparing weeks before filming. He reduced his use of social media, avoided distractions, and focused on keeping his inner life steady. Friends and mentors prayed with him regularly. His spiritual director stayed close throughout the production period, helping him navigate the emotional burden that came with the role. For many actors, character immersion is a creative process. For Jonathan, it was a spiritual obligation he didn't take lightly. He spoke about needing to empty himself before performing scenes of significant spiritual weight. For him, that meant quieting personal thoughts, stepping away from anything that could cloud his mind, and approaching the role with humility. He didn't want to portray Jesus from a place of ego or artistic pride. He wanted the performance to carry sincerity rather than imitation. During the weeks leading to the Last Supper shoot, Jonathan experienced moments of deep emotional fatigue. He wasn't burned out from work. The pressure came from understanding the importance of what he was about to represent. The Last Supper is foundational for Christians. It symbolizes sacrifice, love, and an eternal promise. Jonathan realized that many viewers wouldn't be watching a reenactment. They would be revisiting a moment central to their faith. To him, That meant he couldn't rely solely on acting techniques. He needed internal clarity. He prayed before scenes, stood silently on set to focus his mind, and sometimes asked for a few extra minutes alone before filming critical moments. Cast members noticed his seriousness and respected it. The environment around him shifted gradually as others sensed the emotional and spiritual gravity he was carrying. Some days, the weight affected him physically. He needed to take time away from the cast to recover. These were not episodes of fear or doubt, but responses to the emotional toll of giving himself completely to a character who represents forgiveness, suffering, and unconditional love. By the time the filming week arrived, Jonathan wasn't simply prepared. He was exhausted in a way that only comes from deep internal work. What made this preparation unusual is that it didn't stop with him. The rest of the cast and crew also began adjusting their behavior as they observed his dedication. Conversations became quieter. Breaks were taken more respectfully. People approached the set with an unspoken awareness that they weren't just participating in a dramatic scene. They were stepping into a moment that meant something significant to the person leading the performance. Jonathan didn't demand this level of seriousness. It happened naturally as others recognized how much the role meant to him. And this shared awareness created the environment that eventually allowed the emotional collapse on set to unfold without interruption or misunderstanding. By the time the cameras captured the first take of The Last Supper, Jonathan had given everything he could to be present, sincere, and respectful. What he didn't expect was that even this preparation wouldn't be enough to hold back the emotional weight that awaited him once the scene began. Before any line of The Last Supper was recorded, the production team made a decision that changed the way the cast approached the entire scene. Dallas Jenkins, aware of the enormous spiritual and historical weight surrounding the moment, arranged for the cast to experience a real Passover meal led by a Jewish rabbi familiar with ancient traditions. This was not a lecture or a symbolic gesture. It was a full ritual designed to give the actors an understanding that went far beyond script analysis. The meal began quietly. The actors listened attentively as the rabbi explained each step of the Passover, from the preparation of the table to the purpose of every ingredient. The bitter herbs, the lamb, the matzah, the 4 cups of wine, everything carried a history many of the cast members had never encountered in detail. For them, this wasn't just cultural knowledge. It was a revelation that the Last Supper wasn't an isolated Christian event. It was part of a tradition rooted in centuries of faith, survival, and identity. As the rabbi continued leading the ritual, several actors found themselves reflecting on how little they had previously understood about the Jewish context of Jesus and his disciples. What they had imagined as a solemn Christian moment suddenly expanded into a living connection between past and present. They began to realize that the Last Supper was not originally a symbolic farewell meal. It was a real Passover celebration observed by Jewish men who had grown up with those rituals their entire lives. Elizabeth Tabish, who portrays Mary Magdalene, later described the experience as the first time she could truly imagine what the disciples felt that night. Others said the same. The immersive environment, the prayers, the shared food, the rhythms of the ritual allowed them to see the scene not as a distant religious memory, but as a moment lived by real people in a real cultural setting. This shift in understanding had a direct impact on the way the cast approached the filming. They no longer saw the Last Supper as a purely Christian moment carried by later traditions. They saw it as a bridge between 2 worlds, the ancient rituals of Judaism and the new meaning Jesus gave them. That realization added depth to their performances that no amount of acting technique could have created. Dallas Jenkins, who had attended multiple reenactments throughout his career, said something that stayed with the cast. The Last Supper didn't break from the past, it fulfilled it. That sentence shaped the mood of the entire team. It made them more careful, more respectful, and more aware that they were stepping into a moment that belonged not only to Christian history but to the entire narrative of the Jewish people. The Passover immersion also changed the relational dynamic of the cast. Sharing the meal gave them a sense of unity. For many, it became a moment of emotional preparation that aligned their hearts with the scene they were about to film. Discussions after the meal were quieter, more thoughtful. People asked questions they had never considered. Some expressed surprise at how deeply the ritual affected them. This experience became the foundation for the emotional intensity that unfolded during filming week. It wasn't manufactured emotion or dramatic anticipation. It was the natural result of understanding the weight of what they were portraying. They could no longer approach the scene as a symbolic story. They now knew it as a real historical event steeped in meaning far beyond what could be communicated in a script alone. By the time the cast entered the set for the first day of filming, they were not stepping into a reproduction of The Last Supper. They were stepping into a tradition that had shaped generations, and that awareness created the atmosphere that made the emotional collapse, the silence, and the reverence on set possible. The filming of The Last Supper did not take place in a single afternoon. It extended across 6 days, each one carrying more emotional weight than the last. What started as a routine production schedule gradually turned into something that felt less like work and more like a shared internal journey. Cast members who had been on the series since the beginning said they had never experienced anything like it. From the first day, the room held a tension that no one could fully explain. The actors delivered their lines with precision, but there was a layer of intensity that kept building with every take. Between scenes, conversations became shorter and movements more deliberate. People weren't avoiding each other. They were processing what they felt, but didn't yet know how to describe. As filming continued, unscripted emotional moments began to surface. Tears appeared unexpectedly. Pauses between lines stretched longer than planned. These weren't dramatic flourishes meant for the camera. They were genuine reactions from actors who were feeling the weight of the moment. Some later said they didn't know whether to stay in character or simply allow themselves to feel what was happening. Jonathan Roumie experienced several moments where he struggled to speak. The pressure of the scene, combined with his preparation, made it difficult for him to separate his emotions from the role. He wasn't performing distress. He was genuinely overwhelmed. The cast around him reacted quietly, offering presence rather than instruction. No one tried to fix the moment. They understood it wasn't something that needed fixing. Other actors had their own unplanned emotional responses. Noah James, who plays Andrew, said he felt a heaviness in his chest during a take that wasn't part of the character's arc. He didn't expect it, but he didn't interrupt the scene either. He allowed the feeling to exist because it seemed honest, not theatrical. The most surprising reactions came from the crew, people used to chaotic environments, long hours, and the need to stay focused regardless of what happens on camera. Yet during these 6 days, many of them began behaving differently. Some stood still during breaks, quietly observing the room. Others found themselves tearing up without understanding why. One sound technician, known for being skeptical of anything related to spirituality, later admitted that something in the atmosphere made him stop and evaluate what he believed. He approached Dallas Jenkins after one of the takes and said, "I don't believe in these things, but today, something happened. I don't have an explanation." His comment became one of the moments the director would remember most from that week. The set itself changed, usually. The downtime between takes is filled with movement, equipment adjustments, makeup checks, quiet conversations. But during this scene, intervals became moments of reflection. Crew members stepped aside and remained silent. People avoided unnecessary noise. No one was told to behave this way. It simply happened. Dallas Jenkins found himself responding to the atmosphere in ways that surprised him. He often couldn't bring himself to call cut at the usual time. He let scenes continue longer even after the lines ended, sensing that something meaningful was unfolding in the silence. He later said those extended moments felt more important than the scripted dialogue. By the end of the week, many on set felt physically exhausted despite filming fewer takes than usual. It wasn't the workload. It was the emotional concentration required to stay present throughout the process. Several actors said they needed time alone after wrapping each day, not because they were drained by acting, but because the experience had touched something personal. Even those who didn't identify with the spiritual meaning of the Last Supper admitted the week had changed them. They spoke of a seriousness they couldn't shake off, of a type of quiet respect that lingered long after they left the set, for everyone involved. These 6 days blurred the line between recreation and reality. The experience didn't feel like playing a role or capturing a historical moment. It felt like stepping into an event that demanded honesty, humility, and attention from every person in the room. By the end of filming, it was clear that what happened during those 6 days would not stay contained within the project. It would follow many of them into their personal lives long after the cameras stopped. What happened on the set of The Chosen was more than a difficult filming week or an emotional performance. It became a moment that stayed with the people who lived it. Jonathan Roumie walked away from the Last Supper scene, carrying a different understanding of his role and of himself. Others on the cast and crew described feeling changed in ways they didn't expect, from renewed faith to personal reflection to a deeper sense of respect for the story they were helping bring to life. Not everyone will agree on what happened. Some will call it artistic sensitivity. Others will say it was an emotional response to a sacred narrative. And there will be those who believe something spiritual moved through that room. But regardless of interpretation, the people who were there know one thing: the experience was real to them, and it left a mark no script could have produced. In the end, this story is not about proving whether a miracle occurred. It is about acknowledging the moments that interrupt ordinary life and demand our attention. The week of filming The Last Supper became one of those moments, a time when a room full of professionals felt something they could not easily explain or forget. And now the question becomes yours. What do you believe happened on that set? Was it emotion, art, or something greater moving through the room? Share your thoughts below. Your voice is part of this conversation too.